Hello friends, welcome back my YouTube channel. If you want to watch the super hit movie, Bright in full HD, then first of all, give this video a like, and if you are visiting our channel for the first time, then subscribe to this channel. The name of the movie we are going to discuss in today's video is Bright, so we will give you information about how and where you will get to watch Bright film officially. Apart from this, we will give you a detailed look at the pre-production, post-production, budget, box office collection, and filming of this movie. A detailed review of the movie will also be given in this video, where we will explain the story of this movie in detail. We will also discuss the cast and casting performance of the movie. Apart from this, information about the music department and technical department will also be given. Because of this video is going to be very interesting and entertaining, so you must watch this video till the end. And if you haven't liked this video yet, then like this video now and subscribe to this channel. So let's start the video. Bright is a 2017 American urban fantasy action film produced and directed by David Ayer and written by Max Landis. The film is set in an alternate present in which humans and mythical creatures coexist and details an LAPD police officer, portrayed by Will Smith, and his orc partner, Joel Edgerton, confronting racism and police corruption while protecting a magic wand and the elf girl, Lucy Fry, who wields it. Noomi Rapace, Edgar Ramirez, and Ike Barinholtz also star. Principal photography began in November 2016 in Los Angeles. The film was released worldwide on Netflix on December 22, 2017. While it has received generally negative reviews from critics, it was exceptionally popular with viewers. Netflix called it one of the company's most successful original programs as of January 2018. It spawned an anime spin-off film, Bright Samurai Soul, in 2021. Plot: humans coexist with other sentient species, notably orcs and elves. While magic is real, its practice is illegal. Magic wands exist, but only a few individuals called Brights can wield them without dying. In Los Angeles, veteran officer Daryl Ward is involuntarily partnered with Nick Jacoby, the first orc police officer ever in the U.S. Jacoby is detested by the other police officers for his species and by orcs for being a policeman. Ward's relationship with Jacoby is strained since Ward was shot by an orc robber whom Jacoby failed to apprehend. Internal Affairs suspects Jacoby deliberately let him go. One night, Ward and Jacoby respond to a disturbance at a safe house for the Shield of Light, an extremist group that prophesies the return of the Dark Lord, an ancient, semi-mythical figure defeated millennia ago. The lone survivor is Tika, an elf girl who has a wand. Ward calls for backup, but when the four arriving officers see the wand, they try to coerce Ward into killing Jacoby and letting them steal it for themselves. Ward goes outside, demanding the truth about the robber. Jacoby admits he lost sight of Ward's assailant and mistakenly apprehended a younger orc, whom he then helped flee, knowing that the police would probably kill the boy on sight. When the four officers appear behind Ward, planning to kill both him and Jacoby, Ward guns them down. The gunfire attracts the attention of a Hispanic gang, while rumors of the wand draw the attentions of both its owner Layla, the leader of the radical elf sect, the Inferni, and Candomera, an elf FBI agent assigned to the Federal Magic Task Force. The gangsters corner the trio in a strip club as their leader demands the wand to cure his paralysis. They are slaughtered by Layla, allowing the trio to escape. At a service station, Ward contacts his friend, Deputy Sheriff Rodriguez, who contacts Candomera, but Layla intercepts their conversation. While attacking the service station, she kills Rodriguez. Escaping again, the trio is captured by the Fogteeth Orcs, whose leader Dorgu also wants the wand. He orders his son Mikey to kill Jacoby. However, Mikey is the orc that Jacoby had saved, so Mikey refuses to kill him. Sending Mikey away, Dorgu kills Jacoby himself. As he prepares to kill Ward, Tika uses the wand to resurrect Jacoby, showing she is a Bright. The Fogteeth shaman pronounces this to be part of a prophecy, causing the clan to kneel to them, setting them free. Tika explains that the Inferni believe that assembling 3 wands will allow them to resurrect the Dark Lord. She was once a member of the Inferni, but fled the group and was sheltered by the Shield of Light. Layla loaned her wand to a Bright assassin to kill Tika. Tika killed the assassin, taking the wand. Using the wand to resurrect Jacoby has made Tika gravely ill, and she can only be healed in a magical pool at the safe house. Returning there, they are ambushed by Leela and her enforcers. In the confrontation, Layla's guards are killed, but she holds Tika helpless as Ward and Jacoby run out of ammunition. Ward grabs the wand, believing that the resulting explosion will kill all of them. To everyone's amazement, Ward does not die, revealing he is a Bright. He kills Leela with the wand, triggering an explosion that sets the building on fire. Tika disappears, and the injured Ward and Jacoby escape the building, with Jacoby leading the way. After exiting, he realizes Ward is not with him and is trapped inside. Casting aside first responders, Jacoby charges back into the building, pulling his partner from the flames and debris just in time. This act of bravery is witnessed by the Fogteeth clan, so Dorgu bloods Jacoby, a mark of great respect within Orc society. Ward and Jacoby know that the FBI want knowledge of magical activity kept secret. At a hospital, they give Candemare a doctored account of the previous night's events. Candemare understands the deception, but accepts their tale regardless. In a public ceremony, Jacoby and Ward are celebrated as heroes, and Rodriguez's memory is honored. Ward smiles as he spots Tika moving through the crowd in disguise. Cast: Will Smith as Daryl Ward, a human LAPD officer. Joel Edgerton as Nick Jacoby, the nation's first Orc police officer who is partnered with Daryl. Noomi Rapace as Leela, an Inferni elf seeking control of the magic wand. Lucy Fry as Tika, a young Inferni elf who is in possession of the magic wand. Edgar Ramirez as Candemare, a high-ranking elvish federal agent with the U.S. Department of Magic's Magic Task Force. Ike Barinholtz as Pollard, a corrupt human LAPD officer who seeks to steal the wand for himself. Happy Anderson as Hildebrandt Ulysses Montague, a human federal agent who works under Candemare in the Magic Task Force. Production described as a contemporary cop thriller, but with fantastical elements. The film was directed by David Ayer and stars Will Smith and Joel Edgerton, with a script penned by Max Landis, which Ayer rewrote. Netflix officially picked up the film for a $90 million deal, with filming beginning in fall 2016, making it the most expensive Netflix film to date. Noomi Rapace entered talks to join the cast in May 2016. Landis stated in an interview that official production was expected to begin in September 2016, but that they had already shot a small part in Los Angeles. Ayer's frequent cinematographer, Roman Vasyanov, was confirmed to be working on the project. On October 15, 2016, Lucy Fry was added to the cast. On October 17, 2016, Andrea Nevedo was added to the cast. On October 20, 2016, actor Brad William Henke was cast in the film, 18. On November 1, 2016, Kenneth Choi and Dawn Olivieri were cast in an unnamed role and the role of Smith's wife, respectively. On November 9th, Edgar Ramirez was confirmed to be added to the cast. That same month, Alex Meraz, Matt Gerald, Ike Barinholtz, and Enrique Murciano joined the cast of the film in undisclosed roles. Filming. Photos from the set were first published in November 2016. Filming was completed by February 4, 2017. Reception. Critical response. Bright received criticism for its screenplay, cinematography, poor world building, and ineffective and heavy-handed social commentary. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds an approval rating of 26% based on 113 reviews, with an average rating of 4.110. The website's critical consensus reads, Bright tries to blend fantasy, hard-hitting cop drama, and social commentary, and ends up falling painfully short of the mark on all three fronts. On Metacritic, the film has a weighted average score of 29 out of 100, based on 26 critics, indicating generally unfavorable reviews. Richard Roper of the Chicago Sun-Times gave a negative review of 1.5 stars out of 4. He said, Bright is basically a tired buddy cop movie dressed up in bizarre trappings. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but it's not nearly as self-deprecating and funny as it needed to be. Writing for Rolling Stone, David Fear gave the film 1 out of 4 stars, criticizing the script and incoherent action scenes, writing, This combo of gritty cop procedural and fantasy is a dark, dank, dumb-as-hell mess. David Ehrlich of IndieWire gave the film an F, and called it the worst film of 2017, saying, "There's boring, there's bad, and then there's bright." From the director of Suicide Squad and the writer of Victor Frankenstein comes a fresh slice of hell that somehow represents new lows for them both. A dull and painfully derivative ordeal that often feels like it was made just to put those earlier misfires into perspective. Ayer responded enthusiastically to Ehrlich's review, claiming that he desired for the film to receive a strong reaction either way. NPR's Chris Klimek wrote, "Critics have already lined up to pillory Bright as among the year's worst releases. Don't believe the clickbait. Lazy but not boring, this Netflix is perfectly, stubbornly mediocre and less a chore to sit through than either of 2017's Vin Diesel vehicles," referring to Return of Xander Cage and The Fate of the Furious. Audience response. Several publications noted that while critics were harsh in their assessment of the film, viewers liked it and gave positive reactions on social media. Netflix announced that the film had been viewed more times in its first week than any of its other releases. According to Nielsen ratings, about 11 million American viewers streamed Bright within the first 3 days of its release, with 56% of the audience being male and 7 million being between the ages of 18 and 49. In January 2018, Netflix reported that the popularity of Bright gave a major lift to the company's revenue and number of new subscribers in the last quarter of 2017. CEO Reed Hastings stated, "The critics are pretty disconnected from the mass appeal. They are an important part of the artistic process, but are pretty disconnected from the commercial prospects of a film. If people are watching this movie and loving it, that's the measurement of success." Soundtrack. The soundtrack, titled Bright the Album, was released under Atlantic Records on December 15, 2017, just a week before the official release of the film on December 22, 2017. It features songs performed by various artists including Future, Camila Cabello, Logic, Marshmello, Ty Dolla $ign, BB Rexha, Lil Uzi Vert, Snoop Dogg, and ex-ambassadors. Future. Scrapped sequel. In December 2017, Netflix ordered a sequel. The following month, Netflix confirmed the sequel was moving ahead, with Smith and Edgerton reprising their roles and Ayer directing and writing the script with Evan Spiliotopoulos. In August 2018, it was announced the film would begin filming in March 2019 in Germany. In September 2019, Lucy Fry revealed that production had been delayed, citing Smith's busy schedule. In May 2020, it was reported that Netflix had entered negotiations with Louis Leterrier to direct the sequel. In April 2022, following Smith's altercation with Chris Rock at the Academy Awards, Netflix scrapped the film. Anime spin-off. Main article, Bright Samurai Soul. In June 2021, Netflix announced that an anime spin-off film called Bright Samurai Soul would be produced. It was announced that Kyohei Ishiguro would direct the film, with Michiko Yokote writing the film's script, Atsushi Yamagata designing the characters, and Erect animating the film. The film premiered on October 12, 2021. Netflix had an incredible 2017, anchored by 3 critically acclaimed films out of Sundance, Mudbound, and Cannes, The Meyerowitz Stories, New and Selected, and Okja, along with a seemingly endless supply of new shows, including fantastic programs like Mindhunter, Dear White People, and Master of None. And yet the irony of all of this is that what will likely be their biggest film of the year, certainly their most expensive at a reported $90 million, is David Ayer's Bright, a gaudy, overstuffed piece of blockbuster trash. However, if you think about it, the arrival of Bright makes perfect sense. Netflix has always wanted to compete with the big dogs at the studio, and you can't name a major studio that doesn't have an overdone, stupid blockbuster or 2 on their resume every year. Now Netflix has one too. It's tempting to say that Bright is a reboot of Alien Nation, or a modern hybrid of District 9, The Lord of the Rings, and End of Watch. A much better film, also helmed by this film's David Ayer, but that might give the impression it contains a fraction of the quality of those films. No, what Bright reminded me of most of all was the glut of bad buddy cop movies that came out in the wake of the success of Lethal Weapon. Star projects designed to make a quick buck on marquee names, but with almost no artistic quality whatsoever. And many of them had similarly out there concepts. I'm thinking of films like Red Heat, or Stop, or My Mom Will Shoot. Yes, this movie reminded me of Estelle Getty. Written by Max Landis, Bright imagines a world in which fantasy creatures like elves and orcs live alongside human beings. If you're thinking, oh no, this means we're going to get a lot of really basic lessons about understanding other races through a genre lens, you're not wrong. It's mere minutes before Will Smith's Officer Ward says, "Fairy lives don't matter," and we're treated repeatedly to paper-thin parallels between this world and our own. You see, Officer Ward has a partner that nobody likes named Jacoby, Joel Edgerton, easily the best thing about this movie. Why don't they like him? He's an orc, and they don't trust that he won't side with his people over his profession. In fact, everyone is convinced he recently did so after an orc shot Ward and escaped while Jacoby was chasing him. Over and over again, Landis treats us to a truly vague commentary on racism through the lens of orcism. And to give you an idea of how muddied and unclear this allegory is, Ward asks Jacoby, "Are you a cop first or an orc first?" as we're watching cops beat orcs in the street. Huh? Does he have to be a bad cop first? I don't get it, and I don't think that the movie does either, other than to show that there's something that looks like a centaur cop involved in the beating. Neat. On one long night in this magical land, Ayer loves his one-night movies. Ward and Jacoby stumble upon a magic wand because, well, why not? As you might imagine, wands are powerful currency in this world, as they can make the impossible possible. They're kind of the one ring of Bright. But only a Bright, yes, the name actually refers to something in the film, not just how clever the filmmakers think their concept is, can hold a wand without exploding. Still, everyone wants the wand. And so Jacoby, Ward, and a new friend named Tika, Lucy Fry, who is basically the result of Landis saying, how can we get a character like Mila Jovovich's from The Fifth Element into this movie, have to fend off corrupt cops, the feds, including a wasted Edgar Ramirez, and a powerful group of elves who lost the wand in the first place, led by an evil Noomi Rapace. Smith, Edgerton, Rapace. It's a decent crew, and the concept could have been developed into something intriguing if Landis wasn't so in love with it that he forgot to write decent dialogue. The banter here is insanely sophomoric, caught between Ayer's realistic cop movie aesthetic and the comic book movie that Landis wanted to make. Nonsense lines like, "If you act like my enemy, you become my enemy," will merely have you scratching your head and wondering if anyone read the script before they approved the budget, or if they just so adored the concept that they didn't care. Clearly, this is the kind of exaggerated nonsense. This is a nuclear weapon that grants wishes, and that's when the triple stupid shit is gonna start. Being two more primo bits of stuff that only work if you're high. That could have been effective with a director like Robert Rodriguez to inject it with enough style to make it tolerable. The fatal flaw really is that Ayer and Landis don't seem to be making the same movie, although I'm not sure too many people could make the fantasy world of this flick and the action buddy cop movie blend. It's an absolute mess. It all culminates in an extended scene that's basically the interrogation/torture scene out of those 80s and 90s buddy action movies, only this time people are screaming, "Where is the wand?" over and over again, for what honestly feels like eternity. It's a scene that stands with the worst of the year in terms of structure and screenwriting, and it's where any hope that Bright might bring its bizarre elements together faded completely for me. I started to think of the worst summer blockbusters of 2017, like Transformers: The Last Knight, King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, and The Mummy. And I realized how easily this ridiculous waste of money fit in with those crowd displeasers. They may have been doing so in terms of quality filmmaking before, but Bright proves how much Netflix truly is running with the big dogs now. It's not often you see a movie with a truly original premise, or even a truly original combination of other movie premises, so Bright's high concept certainly grabs the attention. Fantasy creatures such as orcs and elves living alongside humans in modern-day Los Angeles. The elevator pitch would be something like, Middle-earth meets District 9 meets End of Watch. And if that sounds like an impossible genre clash to reconcile, Netflix's frenetic sci-fi buddy cop fantasy comedy thriller deserves credit for ramming its way through, regardless. The ethnic boundaries of this alternative metropolis are quickly sketched out. Orcs are the underclass, deprived and discriminated against. A reference to Orc Lives Matter drives the point home. Elves are the elite, though we only visit their glitzy, exclusive neighborhood briefly. Humans are somewhere in the middle, doing the ordinary jobs and directing their prejudices at the other species rather than each other. The cast is commendably multiracial. Quite where the Centaur traffic cops fit in is never explained, but it's a nice detail. One thing that hasn't changed is the LAPD, which honors the Hollywood tradition of assigning chalk and cheese partners to the beat. Thus, Will Smith's ward, grouchy, sharp-tongued, but essentially decent, is paired with Nick Jacoby, the first ever orc cop, who's ostracized by his own kind, but mistrusted by humans, including, of course, his partner. The credits tell you Jacoby is played by Joel Edgerton, but you'd never know under the blotchy face makeup, contact lenses, and twitching, pointy ears. The plot has grand ambitions in store for the partners. They unintentionally obtain an all-important magic wand, which is like a nuclear weapon that grants wishes. They rescue a mysterious elf waif, Lucy Fry, who's also important, but has very little to do but look waif-life and make the odd acrobatic combat intervention. She's a little like Mila Jovovich in The Fifth Element, except with fewer lines. In pursuit of them and the wand, across the rainy, gloomy night, are evil elves, corrupt cops, and local gangs, both orc and human. There's mention of a dark lord and a prophecy, not to mention the concept of brights themselves. So much to explain, so little time to explain it. Director David Ayer has form in this area, having written Training Day and End of Watch, two buddy cop thrillers, and directed the recent Suicide Squad. He's fond of macho, hard-hitting action, cartridge-showering shootouts, careering car chases, crunching hand-to-hand combat. Some of it is exhilarating, some of it is borderline incomprehensible owing to mistimed editing and a terminally gloomy palette. The pace barely lets up, but sometimes you wish it would. Having established a world so rich in potential and so full of resonance, Bright backs off from exploring its finer points, or those of its characters. Edgerton gives his orc character a credible blend of timidity, dignity, and inner turmoil. Smith, the ostensible star, is often given little to do beyond crack-wise and shoot stuff. One of the most satisfying scenes is where the two cops simply banter in their car. Orcs have a tenuous grasp of humor and irony, but can detect physical tells humans don't realize they're making. Edgerton correctly identifies Smith's facial expression as human who needs a lot more conjugal love. Bright marks the first blockbuster-sized effort produced by Netflix. Rather than acquiring the film through their usual bidding process, Netflix made the film for $90 million and released it exclusively on their streaming platform, except for a single theater in New York and another in Los Angeles. Not only is this tent-pole-sized effort the most expensive Netflix original to date, it also boasts an impressive cast and all the frills of a Hollywood production. Behind the camera, director David Ayer reteams with his Suicide Squad 2016 leading man Will Smith for a genre mashup scripted by pop culture guru Max Landis, Chronicle Victor Frankenstein, synthesizing fantasy elements inside a gritty buddy cop scenario. Although Bright would undoubtedly play better on the immersive big screen, the limitations of a small screen presentation cannot be blamed for its overused tropes, familiar structure, and altogether lousy writing. To be sure, the film can only be described by comparing it to other better material, a Tolkien-esque mythology, ungainly married to Ayer's string of LA cop movies. In the film's alternative, modern-day version of LA, orcs and elves have lived among humans for centuries, separated only by their classes. At the top, elves with their shimmering hair and pale eyes are an elitist class that divides their time between running the world and shopping. Humans sit comfortably in the middle, whereas orcs, who have blue skin marked by an apparent melanin disorder, occupy an inferior social class associated with low IQs, lumbering physicality, criminal behavior, and heavy metal music. Orc prophecies, which foretell of a dark lord who will return, appear in the graffiti-sprayed ganglands of LA, implying a complicated backstory, some of which is detailed in the film's 2-hour runtime. Surely Netflix is planning sequels. But actual magic proves rare in this blended world of fantasy and reality. In fact, federal agents, Edgar Ramirez, Happy Anderson, seek out magic-enabled individuals known as Brights, for fear that they obtain a rare magic wand and could cause no end of destruction. Viewers familiar with Alien Nation, 1988, will recognize the basic setup, which itself was a genre-inflected take on the racially clashing buddy cops from 48 Hours, 1982, and Lethal Weapon, 1987. Weary street cop Daryl Ward, Will Smith, has a new partner, Nick Jacoby, Joel Edgerton, the first orc ever to become a police officer. Ward isn't sure where Jacoby's loyalties lie, with his orc heritage or his badge, even though Jacoby is an outsider among his own kind, not to mention idealistic and honest to a fault. The otherwise exclusively human LAPD doesn't trust orcs and would prefer to have him ejected from the force. Ward's superiors want him to find any plausible reason to have Jacoby fired, but the threat of bad publicity looms. An obvious parallel to race relations and civil rights issues pervades the material, although it's not treated as a serious commentary. In one sequence, Ward lectures his daughter against prejudicial remarks, but the very next moment he announces, "Fairy lives don't matter," when he smashes one of the winged zippy pests to death. Bright 1. The plot kicks into gear when Ward and Jacoby discover a frightened elf, Tikka, Lucy Fry, with a dreaded magic wand, which is basically a nuclear weapon that grants wishes. An elvish group called Inferni, headed by Lila, Noomi Rapace, hopes to resurrect the Dark Lord and needs the wand to do so. Elsewhere, several assorted factions, including dirty LAPD cops, Latino gangsters, an orc crew, and the aforementioned feds, want the wand for their own reasons. Ward and Jacoby spend much of the film in a series of bloody shootouts, chased through LA strip clubs and heavy metal venues, dragging along the virtually silent non-entity Tikka. While dodging one group only to find themselves in the clutches of another, our mismatched heroes learn to trust each other along the way. Not that the audience will care. Smith's character is disagreeable and unpleasant, while the dull Jacoby character never allows Edgerton's performance to penetrate the orc makeup. Bright is less interested in telling a story than world-building to establish a franchise. When Landis's characters aren't yelling "shut up" at one another, they're constantly expounding the film's detailed mythology. Even though everyone in the film lives in this world and should understand its rules, they spend much of the film explaining everything for the audience's sake. Bright never really stops inventing new wrinkles and magic rules, much to the exasperation of the viewer. The exposition continues in the background as well, hoping to evoke a sense of wonder with the random appearance of a dragon flying in the night sky. But Bright's tricks remain obvious. For instance, humans will explode if they attempt to hold a magic wand, except for an ultra-rare human Bright. Guess who that might be? And doom-laden references to the never-seen Dark Lord cannot help but recall Voldemort and fail to pique our interest. In Training Day, 2001, Street Kings, 2008, End of Watch, 2012, and another half-dozen other films about corrupt LA cops, Ayer's frantic, macho energy has proved more stimulating. His brand of cinema works on a visceral level, propelling his characters into a danger zone of gangs, guns, and street crime. Combining his usual material with fantasy elements doesn't add much to the template, aside from some ambitious CGI action sequences and mythology worthy of Dungeons & Dragons. Bright is certainly an attractive prospect given the talent involved, but Ayer's aggressive and ultra-masculine perspective feels tired and perhaps outdated. For Smith, the performance seems like a callback to his poorly aged Bad Boys films. As for Netflix, they've had a banner year with smaller, more artful titles picked up on the studio circuit. Dee Ree's race drama Mudbound, Noah Baumbach's family dramedy The Meyerowitz Stories, New and Selected, and the best of them, Bong Joon-ho's Okja. They should stick with showcasing films that might not otherwise get the audiences they deserve and leave the Hollywood blockbusters to the major studios. The elves are gorgeous, they dress well, They have long, flowing white hair, and they can kick serious ass. They're all relatively in shape and drive beautiful cars and are almost all incredible drivers. Seriously, did they grab the extras? Netflix had an incredible 2017, anchored by 3 critically acclaimed films out of Sundance, Mudbound, and Can the Mire It. Stories, new and selected, along with the seemingly endless supply of new shows including fantastic programs like Mindhunter, Dear White People, and Master of None. And yet the irony of all of this is that what will likely be their biggest film of the year is certainly their most expensive at a reported $90 million. I said David is Bright, a gaudy, overstead piece of blockbuster trash. However, if you think about it, the arrival of Bright makes perfect sense. Netflix has always wanted to compete with the big dogs at the studio, and you can't name a major studio that doesn't have an overdone, stupid blockbuster or two on their resume every year. Now, Netflix has one too. It's tempting to say that Bright is a reboot of Alien Nation or a modern hybrid of District 9, The Lord of the Rings, and End of Watch, a much better film, also helmed by this film's David Ayer, but that might give the impression it contains a fraction of the quality of those films. No, what Bright reminded me of most of all was the glut of bad buddy cop movies that came out in the wake of the success of Lethal Weapon star projects, designed to make a quick buck on marquee names, but with almost no artistic quality whatsoever. And many of them had similarly out there concepts. I'm thinking of films like Red Heat or A, Stop or My Mom Will Shoot. Yes, this movie reminded me of Fest Talghetti, written by a Max Landis. Bright imagines a world in which fantasy creatures like elves and orcs live alongside human beings. If you're thinking, oh no, this means we're going to get a lot of really basic lessons about understanding other races through a genre lens, you're not wrong. It's mere minutes before Smith's Officer Ward says fairy lives don't matter, and we're treated repeatedly to paper-thin parallels between this world and our own. You see, Officer Ward has a partner that nobody likes named Jacoby, Joel Edgerton. Easily the best thing about this movie. Why don't they like him? He's a Nork, and they don't trust that he won't side with his people over his profession. In fact, everyone is convinced he recently did so after an orc shot Ward and escaped while Jacoby was chasing him over and over again. Lantis treats us to a truly vague commentary in our racism through the lens of orcism. And to give you an idea of how muddied and unclear this allegory is, Warren asks Jacoby, "Are you a cop first or an orc first?" as we are watching cops beat to works in the street. Huh? Does he have to be a bot cop first? I don't get it, and I don't think that the movie does either, other than to show that there's something that looks like a centaur cop involved in the beating. Neat. A on one long night in this magical land. Ayer loves his one-night movies. Ward and Jacoby stumble upon a magic wand because, well, why not? As you might imagine, wands are powerful currency in this world. Also, they can make the impossible possible. They're kind of the One Ring of Bright, but only a Bright. Yes, the name actually refers to something in the film, not just how clever the filmmakers think their concept is can hold a wand without exploding. Still, everyone wants the wand. And so, Jacoby Ward and a new friend named T, Lucy Fry, who is basically the result of Lantis saying, how can we get a character like Milo Jovovich's from The Fifth Element into this movie? Have to fend off corrupt cops, the feds, including a waste of the Edgar Ramirez and a powerful group of elves who lost the wand in the first place, led by an evil new rap, Smith Edgerton Rapace. It's a decent crew, and the concept could have been developed into something intriguing if Lantis wasn't so in love with it that he forgot to write decent dialogue. The banter here is insanely soft-eric, caught between Ayer's realistic cop movie aesthetic and the comic book movie that Lantis wanted to make. Nonsense lines like, "If you act like my enemy, a broken bar, you become my enemy," will merely have you scratching your head and wondering if anyone read the script before they approved the budget or if they just so adored the concept that they didn't care. Clearly, this is the kind of exaggerated nonsense. This is a nuclear weapon that grants wishes, and that's when the triple stupid is going to start. Being two more primo bits of stuff that only work if you're higher that could have been effective with a director like Robert Rodriguez to inject it with enough style to make it tolerable. The fatal flaw really is that Ayer and Lantis don't seem to be making the same movie. Although, I'm not sure too many people could make the fantasy world of this flick and the action buddy cop movie blend. It's an absolute mess. It all culminates in an extended scene that's basically the interrogation torture scene out of those A80s and A90s body action movies. Only this time, people are screaming, "Where is the wand?" over and over again for what honestly feels like eternity. It's a scene that stands with the worst of the year in terms of structure and screenwriting, and it's where any hope that Bright might bring its bizarre elements together faded completely for me. I started to think of the worst summer blockbusters of 2017, like Transformers, The Last Knight, King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, and The Mummy. And I realized how easily this ridiculous waste of money fit in with those crowd displeasers. They may have been doing so in terms of quality film making before, but Bright proves how much Netflix truly is running with the big dogs now. There are so many appalling things about a Brighta that it's hard to know where to start. Netflix's most expensive original movie yet is a big ball of knotted up so many threads of insult and injury that finding a way into it is giving me a headache, much as the movie itself did. Just when I think I've pinned down the right example of idiosk to use as a launch pad for diving into the deep end of the dumb, I realize how I can't even begin to explain that. One nasty bit without explaining the dozen other related terrible tangents. The bad is so interconnected here, feeding on itself in a sort of negative feedback loop, coiling tighter and tighter into a singularity of stupid, and then it implodes in a big bang of toxic cinema. It's expanding. Netflix wants to turn this into a series. God help us. Perhaps the best place to start is to note that a Brighta opens by trolling the viewer. After the Netflix logo comes a card for Trigger Warning Entertainment, which may or may not be an actual production company, but is most definitely on all you snowflakes. You ain't going to be able to handle the massive dump of UNPC reality that eyes are bright. Even if it's all fantasy, elves and dorks and magic wands and you dorks can't handle the make-believe. I feel like it is an utter certainty, like that the sun will come up tomorrow and that Netflix's monthly fees are going up in order to pay for this $90 million monstrosity that screenwriter Max Lantis pitched this as Alien National meets The Lord of the Rings, and imagined that it would write itself, or perhaps it grew out of some launch of Watch a Crossover fanfic. And that's how Watch director David, also of Suicide Squad infamy, got on board. What else do you need, really? Except some elegant elves in Armani, thuggish orcs, and humans stuck in the middle with no choice but to be schmucks about it. I'm not sure that Lantis or understand fantasy at all. Beyond the laziest motifs and visual tropes, cheap condescension to fans of the genre drips from every moment of the movie. Just have everyone in tone, some crap, like the Dark Lord is coming and the Shield of Light will stop him. And I think we might be in a prophecy, and only a bride can control the power of the wand. Mix it up with some racist Los Angeles cops, and hey presto. Hard-ass edgelord Antis fails upward again with yet another script that doesn't seem to have a clue how to tell a story that people would enjoy experiencing, but is most definitely dropping some uncomfortable home truths. Losers. His last two films, A Victor Frankensteina and American Ultra, flopped miserably. How does he keep getting paid for his scripts? Beta is so atrocious that it makes me worry that the LAPD racist of the Rampart and Rodney King scandals, among many others. A is being depicted in an unfairly poor light here. There isn't a single damn one of them in this alternate world who isn't a corrupt species jerk, who among other crimes hates orcs and really hates the nation's first, or cop Nick Jacoby, Joel Edgerton. Comes at night, a midnight special. Apparently all the different species have been living together since forever, but civil rights seems to move slower here. It took till the 21st century for an orc to break into the thin blue line. Oops, there's me getting triggered. Also, why does Jacoby have such a human-sounding name? Jacob's reluctant partner, Daryl Ward, Will Smith, A. Collateral Beauty, a concussion, is terrible too. His arc here involves him learning how to be slightly less of a garbage person, and only very reluctantly. Smith's seemingly indefatigable on-screen charms have finally met their match. There is no joy in watching him here. It's possible that the world of Fabrica is intended, though I doubt it, to be a dystopia in which everyone is a garbage person because there's no one to like or empathize with or enjoy spending time with or root for. Not even in a hey, aren't they awful sort of way. Even Jacoby, who is as surely meant to be sympathetic as the butt of relentless and clearly unreasonable bigotry, comes across also Forrest Gumpish and naive, at best, just plain stupid at worst. Someone whom it doesn't seem unjust to dismiss as the diversity hierarch he's frequently called. Among the most egregious of the crimes against storytelling here is that A. Bright A is a parable about racism. It is itself racist as triggered. It's racist about real kinds of people. The Mexican gangbangers are somehow the most gangbangerly child the copyright is ever, and the slapped-on herb and fantasy junk only makes it worse. Word on the street is there's a wand in this hood. One gang leader draws my hood. Ward informs his ghetto-astic black neighbors that fairy lives don't matter today, and then proceeds to beat to death the fairy that is making a nuisance of itself around their homes while they cheer him on. I don't think this is saying the thing about the Black Lives Matter movement that Lampus thinks it is, or maybe it is, but the special achievement of Fabretta is that it is also racist about its invented races. It posits Sork as clannish goons, suited only to be a servant class at best, and elves as wealthy, sophisticated snobs who lord it over everyone else. It posits these things by literally just depicting them and not countering them in any way. A broken bar, except possibly if you squint by suggesting that maybe a few atypical beings might just be the exception that proves the rule. Whatever the thing to say to orcs, or says it after you've suffered through all of that, plus some inane car chases and gun battles, plus an elf damsel in distress, plus the requisite scene set in a strip club to get some tits on screen, human tits only, sorry. Plus a Shreya reference because it's totally plausible that in this cruel world, Hollywood made a children's cartoon about a gruff but lovable Ogar. Aina comes the two things that will make you laugh out loud and not in a good way. One is such an overused glitch, a copyright, that it almost seems to jeer its own obviousness, a sneering, oh, come on, don't complain, you and that was coming. The second is that as well, and worse. It's such an absurd bit of magic ex machina that it seems to be the entire reason for the movie's existence. Say to set up that threatened Series A, and yet it couldn't be more cheap or cheaty. The real fantasy of Fabretta is that anyone involved could have possibly imagined that this exercise in smirking, toned, attempted pandering to genre fans was a good idea. Maybe someone used a confound charm on them. It's the only explanation. There's boring, there's bad, and then there's bright. A movie so profoundly awful that Republicans will probably try to pass it into law over Christmas break. From the director of Suicide Squad and the writer of The Victor Frankenstein comes a fresh slice of hell that somehow represents new lows for them both. A dull and painfully derivative ordeal that often feels like it was made just to put those earlier misfires into perspective. The only thing more predictable than this high-concept police story is the idea that a year as punishing as 2017 would save the worst for last. At least the Emoji Movie owned up after the fact that it was just putting on screen. At least the Emoji Movie had the as you to dress it up in a boat, do a $90 million blockbuster that boasts all the production value of an episode of Charmed. A Netflix's first mega-budget film effort starts with a potentially compelling premise that never gets off the ground. The elevator pitch is easy enough to understand, even if it requires some further explanation. Bright is essentially Training Day meets The Lord of the Rings, but much dumber than that sounds. Imagine, if you will, that the war for Middle-earth was a seismic event in our timeline, and that all of the various fantasy creatures who participated in the fight simply went their separate ways once it was over. The last 2,000 years have played out more or less as we know them, but all sorts of magical species have stuck around in the margins of our history books. Modern-day Los Angeles is almost identical to how it is in real life, except that elves are the 1% and orcs are the systemically oppressed underclass. The film's lazy refusal to explore its conceit any deeper than that is truly staggering. But director Davidra is only willing to make so much room for the heightened genre elements, lest any of that nerd stuff infringe on his well-documented infatuation with or fetish for the LAPD. But needless to, and the fantasticality of a plot that revolves around the search for a magic wand. Airgramming those two things together like RIPD never happened. Something like District 9 stands out as another clear point of comparison, but that movie's riff on South Africa felt so lived in. Maybe Bright would have fared better had Dare repurposed the faux documentary approach he brought to End of Watch. But hedging between the film's desperate modes results in unmitigated disaster. It's rare to see a movie so toxic that it manages to raise multiple red flags before the very first shot, but Bride is a special piece of work. As if the goofy crackle of blue magic that runs through the Netflix logo isn't enough of a warning sign. That gag is followed by a card for a production company called Trigger Warning Entertainment. Just gonna go out on a limb and suggest that these might not be the best of people to make a thinly veiled metaphor for America's racial violence that starts with Will Smith swatting a rodent like Garden Sprite and declaring that fairy lives don't matter, lock and load snowflakes, Smith in a hangdog. Performance so dispiriting that it might genuinely make you pity one of the world's most successful people stars as Daryl Ward, a second lieutenant who was just shot in the line of duty. Daryl had the bad luck of being partnered with Nick Jacoby, the first on the force, and he paid a stiff price for his involuntary role in Social Progress. Nick, played by L. Edgerton, mercifully unrecognizable underneath a splotchy latex mask that makes him look like a cephalitic Navy SEAL, is just a nice guy who happens to be making history. Nick never wanted to be the Jackie Robinson of the LAPD. He just dreamed of having a gay badge. Unfortunately, orcs see him as a traitor and humans see him as a monster. So Daryl is his only genuine shot at acceptance. Spoiler alert, it turns out that who you are on Thea and Sadia is all that really matters. The two of them are going to have to, for me, a kind of mutual trust if they hope to survive the long night to come, which starts when a routine house call spirals out of control and leaves them fending off racist cops, protecting a mute elf, Lucy Fry, and trying to stop her sister Noomi Rapace from summoning the Dark Lord or whatever. Oh yeah, Bright leans away too hard on whatever. As if the film's racial dynamics aren't flimsy enough, they don't ask how black people fit into a story that problematically recodes them as a violent breed of orcs who are responsible for their own subjugation because screenwriter Max Landisa never did. Its fantasy mythology is even less coherent. Guillermo del Toro puts more thought into a single one of his creatures than Lantis, and they manage to spread across the entirety of this interminable funny or die sketch, as every attempt at world building is so feeble that it feels like the film is making fun of its own thoughtlessness. Two works. Love, Death Metal is the kind of cute, insufferably turbad idea that a writer might use to start a conversation about creating a rich, modern fantasy world, not to one, alas. It's par for the course in a movie that might as well be making up its mythology as it goes along, as Lantis busts out a cheap prophecy to pave over the most gling plot contrivances, and Ayer happily wastes half of his lighting budget on a glowing pool of milk that a broken bar. A broken bar does something, a broken bar to stop the Dark Lord or whatever. The creative freedom that Netflix grants filmmakers is wonderful and worth considering. But Bright suggests that constructive oversight isn't always a bad thing. A few studio notes can go a long way. Hopefully, a lack of supervision doesn't translate to a lack of concern. Truth be told, Bright is so wretched that it invites only the most cynical of interpretations, leaving you with no choice but to assume the film was tainted by the knowledge that most of its audience would see it on their phones or laptops. Ayer's dim and sloppy action set pieces look wildly out of place on a movie screen. They're so bland, you almost expect Iron Fist to show up. And the constipated dialogue scenes that surround them tend to repeat the same points ad nauseam, as though they were written to accommodate a teenage kid who's multitasking between the movie he's watching in one window and the porn he's streaming in another. Forget about staying woke. Bright doesn't even care if you're really watching. Without exaggeration, the final dialogue exchange in this movie is so punishingly drawn out that you might start wondering what you did wrong. But please, if you're going to watch this at home. Netflix's release plan remains unclear, but you couldn't have a worse experience in a movie theater if you saw Salilda Squared or The 120 Days of Saddam in 4X. The real problem with Bright A, or the A-realist of its problems anyway, is that the movie's damage could linger for long. After the lights come up, or after you've clicked away from it in favor of rewatching the new season of The Crown. Potentially a dark harbinger of things to come. Bright isn't only the worst film of 2017, it could be responsible for many of the worst films of 2018 and beyond. If this gambit pays off, if Netflix fortifies their assault on the theatrical experience by internally developing blockbuster-sized movies that are of a semi-consciously optimized for disinterested audiences, then it's hard to imagine how dark the future of feature-length filmmaking might be. Here's one indication. Shortly before the embargo on Bright reviews was lifted, Netflix announced that a sequel to Bright is already in the works. Orcs Love Death Metal is the kind of cute, insufferably tried bad idea that a writer might use to start a conversation about creating a rich modern fantasy world. Not to one. Alas, it's par for the course in a movie that might as well be making up its mythology as it goes along. As Lantis busts out a cheap prophecy to pave over the most gling plot contrivances, and Ayer happily wastes half of his lighting budget on a glowing pool of built that a broken bar. A broken bar does something a broken bar to stop the Dark Lord or whatever. The creative freedom that Netflix grants filmmakers is wonderful and worth considering, but Bright suggests that constructive oversight isn't always a bad thing. A few studio notes can go a long way. Hopefully, a lack of supervision doesn't translate to a lack of concern. Truth be told, Bright is so wretched that it invites only the most cynical of interpretations, leaving you with no choice but to assume the film was tainted by the knowledge that most of its audience would see it on their phones or laptops. Ayer's dim and sloppy action set pieces look wildly out of place on a movie screen. They're so bland, you almost expect Iron Fist to show up, and the constipated dialogue scenes that surround them tend to repeat the same points ad nauseam, as though they were written to accommodate a teenage kid who's multitasking between the movie he's watching in one window and the porn he's streaming in another. Forget about staying woke. Bright doesn't even care if you're really watching. Without exaggeration, the final dialogue exchange in this movie is so punishingly drawn out that you might start wondering what you did wrong. But please, if you're going to watch this at home. Netflix's release plan remains unclear, but you couldn't have a worse experience in a movie theater if you saw Salilda Squared or The 120 Days of Saddam in 4X. The real problem with Bright Area Lista of its problems anyway is that the movie's damage could linger for long after the lights come up or after you've clicked away from it in favor of rewatching the new season of The Crown, potentially a dark harbinger of things to come. Bright isn't only the worst film of 2017, it could be responsible for many of the worst films of 2018 and beyond. If this gambit pays off, if Netflix fortifies their assault on the theatrical experience by internally developing blockbuster-sized movies that are semi-consciously optimized for disinterested audiences, then it's hard to imagine how dark the future of feature-length filmmaking might be. Here's one indication. Shortly before the embargo on Bright reviews was lifted, Netflix announced that a sequel to Bright is already in the works. When I was a young lad, I would sometimes ply a Dungeons & Dragons I was a magic user, and man, would I ever warp. Would my cousin was the DM, which stands for a Dungeon Master, meaning he would create the setting and narrative flow of gameplay. He was great at his job, but naturally I also wanted to sit in the big seat. After much nagging, he let me switch roles during a campaign. That's when I realized that having a cache of nifty ideas was not the same as telling a story. I was reminded of this watching a David Ayer's A Wretched Film, a Brita which debuts on Netflix this week. There is a whiff of an interesting idea in there, but it is buried in tedious scenes lacking clear direction, endless generic and poorly lit shootouts, and cringeworthy sequences of allegedly witty banter. This movie is an absolute wreck, which is unfortunate as it is also something of a big debut for Netflix's original film Shangle. The streaming platform distributed 3 outstanding movies this year. Aja Adamat Story's new and selected A, and especially Unbound 2. Bright's enormous budget, reportedly upwards of $100 million, and the visibility of a listister, Will Smitha effectively resets the counter to 0. A disaster like this, a movie that would be more at home of sci-fi than a premium streamer, is not likely to gain Netflix via mainstream film industry acceptance it craves. Beta is set in an alternate reality in which generic races from the realms of high fantasy live among us. Hulking orcs are discriminated against, though they still play in the NFL, while sleek elves live in luxury and run everything. There are also bird-sized fairies that sometimes fly around. Perhaps they are sentient as well. But when our hero LeCop Ward Smith swats and kills one, he announces fairy lives don't matter. Toad Day, a typical example of the film's attempts at humor. There's a vague notion of the film recontextualizing real-life issues in a fantasy setting, but its world-building is so inept that there is 0 point in scrutinizing any symbolism beyond the obvious. Orcs deserve respect, but the man won't give it to them because of ancient tribal grudges. Eventually, Ward will learn to hold an olive branch thanks to his relationship with his partner Nick Jacoby. Joel Edgerton and the first ever, or cop. Guess who's coming to the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association dinner? Edgerton is, to be fair, tasked with being engaging despite a ton of makeup. But his whole character is predicated on a transparent device. Nick does not know how things work, so he asks a bunch of dumb questions that give us our painfully slow entry into this half-ass world. Unlike the 1980s, film and TV series Alienation, a similar buddy cop movie between human and other, we don't see a split between reality and the fictional world. Do Brita would rather just dunk us in the deep end and let the story take over, which would be a good idea if there was actually a story to tell. In light of anything compelling, Ayer, coming off the travesty that was a Suicide Squad, and his screenwriter, a Twitter troll, and Max Lantis, a decide to follow Ward and Jacob beyond one deadly night through the South Universe LA. This involves a lot of running, crashing, shooting, cursing, more shooting, and dot. Did I mention shooting? It is a dreadful bore as a narrative, and even more aggravating a visual non-event. How do you screw up a fight scene with elves at a neon-lit strip club, or the sort of chase sequences so exhilaratingly shot in films like He a Good Time, made with a fraction of Fab Bright's budget during the endless slog that Isa Bright's central adventure? Smith discovers that he is the one Snore after rescuing an elf girl who has gone rogue and stolen a magic wand. They are then chased by elven baddies, including a new Noomi Rapace, who I must say wears a dynamite blazer. There are crooked cops and feds and gangbangers and a Nick Mafia. You'd think this would be an opportunity to at least go wild with production design, but other than a few shots involving a throne of bones, it's just a typical low-rent, direct-to-video crime movie that somehow snagged Will Smith. While I had the misfortune to see a Brita in a theater, most people will simply press play out of curiosity on their Roku remote. I am willing to concede that this might elevate the experience a little. The ability to take a quick trip to the kitchen or restroom after shouting no, don't pause it to your partner on the couch, will be liberating. Of course, you could also do a quick search and see if the vastly superior or Vandically The Last Witch Hunter is streaming and watch that instead. Right. The first big-budget straight-to-Netflix movie starring Will Smith is not as bad as you have been led to believe. In fact, if you enjoy medium-high concept fantasy fiction and buddy cop shoe time-up movies in equal measure, it's probably just the movie for you. Going into watching a Bright, all I knew was that I thought the trailer was cool, but that my wife had heard it was really, really bad. The really part didn't worry me all that much because A, I like a lot of bad movies, and B, I already paid for Netflix this month, so what do I have to lose besides time? I was not aware of the savaging this film was receiving from critics and the equal opposite reaction of fans blowing back in the Twitterverse to support it. Remember when some people liked a thing and some people didn't? And that was just fine, because not everything is for everyone. Me too. The internets need to chill on both sides of the argument when it comes to a movie like this. But that's another column. Backdoor Bright. Set in a modern world where elves, orcs, pesky fairies, and magic are all real and have been part of society since the beginning. We get dropped into the world and hit the ground running. Elves are rich and snooty. Orcs are hated for once teaming up with the Dark Lord in a great battle in humans' area, broken by humans. As far as concepts go, I was all in. Gangbanger orcs that Will Smith keeps calling the homies sporting gold chains and saggy pants. Secret elm death cults. Fairies getting into the bird feeder. Come on, this is good stuff. Will Smith is an LA cop. His partner is the first orc on the force. Think we're fine as Star Trek without the tolerance. They patrol the mean streets with a very heavy-handed dorks as Africanamine allegory waiting behind most of the early scenes. The movie quickly ditches what could be a compelling political or social commentary narrative for explosions, chases, blood murder, and lots of swearing. I'm not arguing with the choice to go this route. It's the movie that director David Ayer's Suicide Squad got paid to make. But there is another movie or an ongoing series in here that I would like to see. There is a magic guffina, a broken bar wand, a magic wand, and some evils with ninja skills that want it. Also tossed in, we have a nice elf, a Latino gang, an orc gang, crooked cops, and a strip club shootout. The contrast to the paint-by-numbers cop action stuff and the rituals of orc culture in modern times is cool. Again, I would watch a series just about this world to learn more. The concept carries the movie further toward the finish line than maybe it deserves to get. I will go ahead and gripe that the chase, rest, shootout, chase, repeat pattern gets a little stale through a good chunk of the movie. There are only so many locations I want to see a guy stomp into shooting twin machine guns in the air while people scatter. I will also admit that the plot is pretty simple and the characters are fairly one-dimensional. I don't know if these are byproducts of cuts, editorial choices, or just a hollow script, but as I have said before, there was more movie here to make all I like it bright. I would have paid to see it in a theater and not being mad on the way out. Was it a game changer? No, of course not. But it doesn't try to be. It takes a big concept, merges it with the genre, and gives you something to watch with explosions and Will Smith. Critics and Twitter have a lot to say about this movie, and I guess I have too. At the end of the day, I think it's a case of something not being for everyone that happens to be on Netflix, where we all watch all the things now. People are going to have opinions because we don't even have to leave our house to see it. It's just there. And since it's just there, I think it's worth a watch. Even if it's just to decide that you don't like it, as genre hybrids go, you might be able to imagine films less promising than director or a David Raw and screenwriter. Max Land is a brighter Ma, a Holocaust, their rom-com perhaps, or a musical about zombies, in pairing the gritty Los Angeles cop flick Ayer often makes with the fantasy world of orcs and elves. Though a Brighta is sufficiently weird-sounding that it all but begs viewers to come in armed with tomatoes and rotten eggs. Alas, the finished product, though plenty embarrassing, isn't quite involving enough to merit the kind of pylon mockery that greeted Ayer's DC Comics abomination as Suicide Squad. Starra Will Smitha and Jalola Agertona play it mostly straight here, doing their part to sell the dopey premise. But the screenplay offers viewers little reward for our own suspension of disbelief. Rumored to be the most expensive in Netflix original film to date, the pick may well attract eyeballs on the streaming outlet, but its potential as a franchise starter is laughably small. Imagine an alternate version of our own reality in which humans and mythological creatures had always lived alongside each other. Presumably, that world would be rather different in physical form and daily behavior from the one we know. But as Lantis' screenplay imagines things, This fantasy LA is nearly identical to ours, except on two ways. Graffiti has orcs and elves in it, and downtown sports some dub-like architecture thanks to the ultra-rich denizens of the Alvin Special District, who spend their days just around Nina the World and shopping. We occasionally see a center here, but if modern architecture and plumbing have made any accommodations for them, the movie doesn't know about it. Human cop Daryl Ward Smith has the misfortune of being the partner of the nation's first orc policeman, a Ayer Tanzanica Jacoby. Orcs are hated by humans because 2,000 years ago, they fought on the side of the Dark Lord or something like that. Nowadays, orcs known by the lovely appetite pigskins are a permanent and violent underclass, and only the fear of bad PR keeps bigoted officials from booting a Jacob out of the LAPD. The thingly obvious allegory has little to say about race relations in the real world. And given the way interspecies differences play out here, it's actually pretty insulting to human minorities, even if we ignore repugnant quip that a repurpose as a Black Lives Matter as a tag for an ostensibly comic killing. Actual magic seems to be pretty rare in this world, so it's a big deal when Jacobia and Ward arrive on a crime scene, where rogue elves led by Noomi Rapace, wasted here, have thrown violent spells around and incinerated some folks. A much bigger deal is that one has left her magic wand behind, inspiring a bloody race to obtain it that pits corrupt cops against gangbangers and the aforementioned elves who cartwheel through action scenes as if they were assassins cut out of fathoms for being too unbelievably lethal. Over the course of one of those very long days, scene before enters a training danded dark blue ward, and a Jacob you must protect both the wand and the very skittish elf named to take a Lucy Fry. This grueling attempt to survive until they can safely rid themselves of the wand is fine as far as it goes, but the supernatural elements are so poorly explained and implemented they make us wish we were watching some generic reality-based Atura instead. Tears, one of the few bits of dialogue that tries to make sense of the sketchy rules of Landis mythology. Some movies identify their chosen ones with mysterious birthmarks or the like. But here, you know you're a so-called bright when you touch a wand with your bare hand and you don't explode. That's far from the only clunker in the screenplay, but the brighter spends less time imagining its world than it does having people bicker in all too familiar ways. It's possible that this screenplay holds a record for the number of times people tell each other to shut up, but if not, those words are spat out often enough that it's hard not to goofall when they pop up at a moment that should be dramatic, if only the goofs came more frequently or gave more pleasure. Brida might be worth watching. If you had asked me 2 days ago how I felt about a Brida, I would have had no doubts or apprehension in my mind. Just based on the trailers, it looked like an interesting concept that felt enjoyably familiar. It reminded me of one of my favorite game universes, a Shadowrunner, which is a cyberpunk tabletop RPG that contains elements of magic. However, when I learned that David Ayer directed it, I lost a little hope as I was no fan of FA Suicide Squad. Then I remembered that some of that wasn't Tara's fault, so I tempered my concern. 2 seconds later, any semblance of hope was completely gone when I learned Max Lantis wrote the script. If anyone is least equipped to deal with the nuanced social issues inherent in the conceit of this film, it's a man born with the silver spoon in his mouth. Other people's takes on this film are hard to avoid in the Twitter sphere and the web at large, but I still tried to go into this with an open mind, even with my hope in ruins. The world of Fabretta is exactly like our own, except that mythical creatures made their home here. A great war happened 2,000 years ago, and the orcs sided with the ominously named Dark Lord. That side lost, and the orcs have been paying the price ever since leaving them with no standing in society. On the other hand, elves are the model minority and live in the lap of luxury, lording it over the subservient orcs. The story itself begins in media, where Will Smith's character Daryl Ward is already partners with the first orc member of the LAPD, Nick Jacoby, played by Joel Edgerton. The situation of distrust is established in the opening of the film between the protagonists, as Jacob's presence is so unwanted that the other officers in Their unit convince Ward to spy on him. They want Jacoby to confess to colluding with the orc who shot Ward and got away. However, events take a turn, and these two must rely on one, turns their backs on them both. From here, supernatural elements are introduced as a race ensues to protect a traitor elf named Tech Lucy Fry, who has stolen a one from an evil elf named Leela Rapace, who is the leader of a sinister sect of elves who are trying to resurrect the Dark Lord. Just typing this plot out makes it obvious how dumb this movie is. But the plot is just one of many issues I had with this movie. Cultural references that don't stick to landing are problematic throughout. Early on, we see how much of a scumbag Ward is when he declares that today fairy leaves don't matter. He then proceeds to very brutally kill a little fairy that was just doing typical fairy things. Considering that Will Smith is an African-American actor and the Black Lives Matter movement is a hot-button topic. Still, it feels very tone-deaf for his character to utter such a line. They could have chosen to reference anything else. Another reference that made no sense was uttered by a Hispanic sheriff who serves as an ally to our protagonist. Jacoby makes a comment about the works always being the bad guy. And then Sheriff Rodriguez, J. Hernandez, comments about Mexicans getting blamed for the Alamo. I've lived in Texas my entire life and have never heard anyone ever say that. In other words, it comes across as ignorant, and I can't be racist because racist things happen to me too. Frankly, the biggest problem in this movie is its entire conceit. A brighter just doesn't work as an allegory on race relations in 2017. If these beings have been around for the last 2,000 years and presumably before that time, why would we just now be getting an orc on the LAPD? Shouldn't that have happened at an earlier time? I'm not saying that everything would be perfect, considering that the state of the world today is far from perfect, and we've all been living together for a millennia. But the issues would be a little more nuanced than this. You can't just slap a bunch or orcs and elves in this world and expect it to work without considering the big picture. Other fundamentals of the human world would need to be adjusted to rationalize these elements. The movie may say that orcs and elves have been around for a long time, but the treatment feels like they've only been around a few decades. I mentioned a shadow runa, and it's silk in the introduction, and it bears mention again. The big reason why the race allegory works in that setting is the time constraint the game places on the rise of metahumans in their world. Orcs and elves have only been around for 60 years. It makes sense for all the hatred to exist when humanity is still wrapping its brain around the idea of other sentient beings coexisting with humanity. In a bright up, it makes absolutely no sense why Neuron the police force would be such a polarizing issue in 2017. Considering their size and other attributes, which the movie points out are perfectly fine when it comes to sports, why wouldn't you want their strength and stamina on the streets helping to fight crime? Plus, the police force has not one but 2 centaurs on the SWAT team. Is that not a big deal too? Is that okay? Because half of them is human. This element doesn't even get a mention, and it feels like a lost opportunity for the type of commentary that's being targeted by the creative forces behind the movie. But let's try and find a positive. The orcs do look good. At least, it seems that they went with some practical makeup effects instead of CGI. Individual orcs have a similar skin tone, but their patterns aren't identical. You can tell them apart fairly well, especially Jacoby, who seems to be a bit smaller and lacks tusks. Other visual effects in this movie look pretty decent too, as if a considerable amount of the post-production budget went to make this look more like a theatrical release versus one that's made for TV, which makes sense considering this is Netflix's most expensive feature to date. Unfortunately, the more I sit down to think about this movie, the more I find to dislike. In my cursory search about its writer, I landed on a now deleted tweet from him that stated, "I've slowly come to realize that a bright, my new hot script, if made well, could potentially be my ass Star Wars, and it feels crazy." This was 2 years ago, and this is definitely not an evergreen tweet. I've not read the original script, and apparently Ayer did some rewrites, but still, This shows how delusional the writer is considering his track record with other scripts. This movie doesn't come close to the magic and majesty of even the worst Star Wars movie. If you're looking for favorite role-playing game setting, come to life, or even just a fun buddy cop movie with fantasy elements, you'll not find that with A Bright. If you want a better allegory on the state of race relations in current society, just rewatches Autotopia. A Bright is a giant mess that thinks its message is clever, but is so forced as to be laughable. There's a part Tina Bright, Netflix's reportedly $90 million attempt at blockbuster filmmaking where Will Smith answers a phone call in the rain and refers to himself as the with the wand. I laughed, because Will Smith is still a charming performer and the exact cadence of the line. Smith's cop character, you see, has recently gotten his hands on a highly destructive piece of magical technology. Hence, he is the with a wand. Sounds absurd. It's a moderately clever mix of tough guy lingo and fantasy mumbo-jumbo, which is what you'd expect from a film its creators have been talking up as hybrid of fat training diet and a Lord of the Rings. It works. Sadly, it's one of the only parts that works in this giant miscalculation of a movie. In recent days, A Bright, which currently sits at 29% in Rotten Tomatoes, has been pilloried by critics calling it an absolute mess, a colossal waste of time, and the worst movie of the year. If the idea of Smith, who also starred in Thea, hilariously awful A Tall Beauty, a last holiday season, redeeming with his Suicide Squad a director, David Ayer for a buddy cop action thriller with aspirations of being a parable about modern race relations, didn't get you psyched. These reviews won't exactly send you reaching for the Apple TV remote. The creative team behind the movie appears to have gone into damage control mode, with their tweeting back at a critic that the highest compliment is a strong reaction. Either way, in screenwriter Max Landis, distancing himself from one of the film's more groan-worthy lines. But is the movie actually that bad? Does it really deserve to be compared to a cynical travesty like the Emoji Movie? Was it more boring than the Pirates of the Caribbean, a movie where Johnny Depp could barely feign consciousness on camera? The short answer is no. Do a Brighta isn't a good movie. Most of the something oddly touching about its devotion to being the most lun-headed movie of the year. Ayer throws down the gauntlet within the opening. Moments when an exposition dump is provided, not by a newscaster on TV or a announcer on the radio. No, in David Ayer's universe, world building is accomplished by a quick cutaway to Thea Joe Rogan, experiencing a podcast playing on a character's open laptop. Finally, you might say a movie for people who love dark fantasy novels, but also enjoy the taste of creatine and dream of owning their own sensory deprivation tanks. But after the opening, Smith's character Daryl Ward, a veteran street cop nearing retirement and coming off an injury leave following a near-fatal shooting, climbs behind the wheel of a cop car with his partner Nick Jacoby, Joel Edgerton, and the movie descends into a by-the-numbers One Bad Night plot about a magic wand, an elf on the run. Noomi Rapace is also around to play the villain who wants the wand for some reason. Yes, Jacob is an orc. The first orc to ever serve in the LAPD, and tense, shut-up-filled banter between the two. Cops is meant to give the movie a touch of allegory to it. Some context. In the world of Fabrite, elves wear fancy clothes and live in a secluded, wealthy section of the city, while orcs are demonized, oppressed, and live in more low-income areas. It's a clumsy metaphor complicated by the fact that Tyr doesn't really attempt to square the fantasy creature stereotypes with the racial stereotypes the characters occasionally alludes to and in some unfortunate cases embody at certain points. There's dialogue about diversity hires and orcs being good at football that's supposed to scan as funny or insightful, but mostly just feels dumb, not fun-dumb. Either it's dumb if the movie ditched its attempts at profundity. It might have actually succeeded as an act of wild-eyed bravado like Anal Ga novel written on the back of a UFC t-shirt. Unfortunately, Ayer can't even make this work as a remake of his own 2012 cop drama, End of Watch. The dynamic between Ward and Jacoby is similar to the one explored in that movie, but he's drained it of the idiosyncrasies, flashes of W, and sense of intimacy. Any movie that has a scene where Rihanna Kendrick raps along to Camerona is doing something right. Instead of retreating from the bloated set pieces of Suicide Squad and returning to his gritty roots, he's attempted to split the difference between the two periods of his career, and the clash of sensibilities never coheres. The cop scenes feel generic, and the fantasy aspects are both confusing and over-explained. A Magic Task Force agent, played by Tilden Grammars, walks into the movie with a chip on his shoulder and a ridiculous haircut, and then disappears for big chunks before reappearing at the end. Maybe he cast a vanishing spell on himself. It's too bad, because Smith shows flashes of his old self here. No matter how disappointing his recent films have been, he's still the star of Fab Bad Boys, A Independence Day, and A Man in Black. When he yells at an oar to take your fat Shrek-looking ass back home, it's easy to imagine a world where Ebright doesn't feel like an awkward essay on race relations, written by a junior varsity wrestler with the secreted dungeons and drag on a habit. If the movie had simply aimed it a little lower, it wouldn't have missed so many shots. I never bothered watching this when it first came out a few months ago on Netflix due to the mostly dreadful reviews. It also just looked like a very silly concept. But last night, I figured it was time to give it a shot, as it at least looked like something unique. And I also just enjoy watching Will Smith. I can very much understand why Bright got the poor reviews, as you get the feeling it never really knows what genre it's supposed to be. Just look at Netflix, and it has it id under action, adventure, sci-fantasy, thriller, and crime. Despite this, though, I still found myself enjoying Bright for what it was. Yes, it obviously had unsettled social commentary about race and police corruption, but it's also at its heart a good old-fashioned buddy movie. Will Smith is his usual self, but gets to be a bit of a dick when he is teamed up with a new partner who happens to be an orc. I feel stupid even writing that. But let's move on. His partner, Nick Jacoby, is played by Joel Edgerton, who I think is one of the best actors working today. He is a true chameleon in this movie, totally unrecognizable under the impressive makeup shunned by his own race and fellow police officers. Jacoby is the first to cop, and plenty of people are unhappy about it, including Ward Smith. So, we get the usual buddy movie bickering, but it's not exactly good-natured banter, with Ward being genuinely hostile towards Jacoby, blaming him for being shot by another orc. When the two cops stumble upon a magic wand, every bad gay in the city comes after them, wanting the power for themselves. None more so than Noomi Rapace's Leela, who wants to bring back the Dark Lord. So, it's all quite ridiculous, but is played mostly straight, and for some reason I totally bought into it and really enjoyed the story, as well as the hard action, of which there is plenty. We have fight scenes, shootouts, explosions, and more, with plenty of bloodshed and dead bodies. There is still plenty of humor, though, with some choice one-liners, and Ward and Jacoby become a really likable duo who you will totally root for. Visually, it looks a little like Suicide Squad, as it's from the same director, David, who I am a big fan of. I think Bright is the better movie, though, as it isn't trying to squeeze in so many characters and doesn't feel like it's been messed up by a studio. I love the look of LA in this movie, to where we have some fantasy-style buildings intermingled with the real city, giving it this familiar yet otherworldly look. Overall, Bright is far better than I expected, with plenty of violence and action, two great leads, and a unique story that's unlike anything we've really seen before. It will be hard to swallow for some, and I totally get why you wouldn't like it. But I thought it was a lot of fun and welcome the sequel. I was really looking forward to Arita being released on Netflix. Not only because I love sci-fi fantasy with all the fascinating creatures. No, it was more so because I love the fact that Netflix has embraced this genre several times already, especially with movies like Spectra and AQ, which I certainly loved parts of. Though neither of them completely blew my mind, honestly, Ifura would be the movie that it really rocked my world. To my disappointment, it didn't. The one thing I really liked about A Bright was Joel Edgerton portraying the orc, Nick Jacoby. Will Smith, on the other hand, is as solid as ever in his performance, but brings nothing new to the table. I mean, his character in this movie is basically the same as it was in I, Robot. Unfortunately, his character Brita doesn't have nearly as much depth as the one from My I, Robot. This obviously isn't Will Smith's fault, so I can't blame him, but it does mean Joel Edgerton is the and listened to all the time. And this is from someone who loves Will Smith and will continue to watch every movie he makes. Before I get to the review, I'm going to share some related personal information because it may influence my criticism in ways that I can't recognize. I always try to be as unbiased as possible in my reviews. Even when I don't like a particular film, I make it a point to understand who the film was made for and what the film was trying to achieve, and then I review based on those factors. In this case, the film hits a little too close to home, and I don't know if I'm compensating enough for that. When I decided to pursue screenwriting back in 2004, the first script that I wrote was about a modern-day fantasy world where all of the races from Dungeons & Dragons coexisted in a setting that was very similar to present-day America, except heavily colored by fantasy elements. I refined the screenplay over the years, always giving it another round of polishing and updating every time I passed it into the hands of an industry contact. I even submitted it to some screenwriting contests and placed as a top 10 finalist in one of them recently. Unfortunately, none of those opportunities ever panned out. So, you can imagine how charmed and surprised I was to discover Theta Brita was coming out with the same general concept. My first and strongest day reaction was Theta. I wanted a Brita to fail. But hey, I wanted my film to be the movie that contemporary audiences recognized as having melded fantasy with everyday reality. I had worked so hard on the script, and it had been my impetus for almost everything I did related to the entertainment industry, from starting this site to all the years I spent covering Hollywood, attending industry parties, and buying dinner for anyone with some influence. To see someone else's similar concept come to life instead of mine was heartbreaking. After accepting that a Brita was going to become a thing, I embraced it. In fact, I now wanted it to do well because I wanted to have something to point at as a success story for my own film. I felt similarly with The Lord of the Rings. Our films came out and re-established a presence of high fantasy concepts in the minds of moviegoers. However, when I wrote pitches for my film to managers and executives, I tried citing a Brita as a similar film to save time in explaining the world. I thought I was being clever by referencing a movie that was receiving a lot of press. After rejecting me, one executive wrote back, that little nugget of wisdom tossed over. The high walls of Hollywood crushed my hopes that a Brighter would be a good film. It colored how I viewed the trailers, which now had a sheen of made-for-TV to them. Finally, the recent article's casting of Brita as the worst film of 2017 and other instructing viewers not to watch it prepared me for the worst. So with coffee in hand, I settled in for an evening of awfulness that could only be rivaled by a Manos, the Hands of Fate. But it never came. In fact, I really enjoyed watching A Bright. In many ways, it's the realization of my own film, except perhaps not as grandiose as my vision. But beyond my personal attachments, it's also just a well-made film that manages to make audiences see past the fantasy and experience the prototypical buddy cop story that's engrossing in its own right. Now, on to the review. In this reimagining of present-day America, the fantasy races that we're all familiar with, like elves, orcs, humans, and even centaurs, live in Los Angeles going about their daily lives. However, there is a definite hierarchy to the races, with orcs being on the lower rungs of society, making up labor and crime element, while the elves essentially live in their version of Beverly Hills and maintain all of the seats of power. The humans are somewhere in the middle. The story revolves around police officer Daryl Ward, Will Smith, and his new partner Nick Jacoby, Joel Edgerton, who is also an orc and the first of his kind to wear the badge. After responding to a disturbance in a sketchy part of town, the two officers discover runaway elf Lucy Fry in possession of a magic wand, which is a rare magical artifact of unimaginable and limitless power that only very select few can wield. Those that can are known as Brights. Unfortunately, everyone in town wants the wand and are willing to kill for it. The anti-hype for Brita is way overblown, but I can also understand why some people won't like it. Anytime a story deals with magic, if rules aren't established early, then magic can feel like a too convenient way to solve difficult situations. The Myth B building also feels a little hokey, with characters referencing the return of a Dark Lord and being part of secret resistance. Groups that sound like bad clan names from online role-playing in games. Bryan wants to be more than just a concept film. It's trying to tell a much larger story, full of spectacle and wonder, which is evidenced by all of the references to that larger story in the dialogue and ancillary visuals. Unfortunately, there isn't much content that covers the history of the world as understood within the film. So, when an orc talks about how his race made the wrong decision 2,000 years ago, it's not meaningful to the audience in any emotional way. Also, the humans don't behave as though the fantasy races have always been in their lives. Instead, the world of Fabria feels more like the world of Alien Nation, where a foreign population has just recently become fully integrated into human society, with the human population still trying to cope. Perhaps another drought or a longer runtime could have shored up some of these weak points. A bigger budget might have also helped secure more filming locations. The biggest obstacle that a Brighter places in front of audiences is that it immediately presents a high hurdle for viewers to overcome in order to enjoy the film. They either immediately accept modern-day fantasy races, or they don apostrophe to A. It's one thing to present fantasy races as space aliens, star with elvish Vulcans and Dorsish Klingons. That concept feels removed enough that audiences can accept it without many questions. It's another thing to present fantasy races as getting some coffee at your local Starbucks. Suddenly, the mind is flooded with thoughts around logistics and how history might be reshaped, with dragons still flying in the sky and magic being a real force in the world. That's exactly why the Brighter tries to display in a very nonchalant manner. If audiences can accept that, then they're going to have a good time. If not, then they write articles commanding others not watch the film. There was a moment early on that erased my skepticism. A man who looked homeless stood in the middle of an intersection, babbling nonsense while wielding a sword. Daryl and Nick arrived to meet the sheriff on site to resolve the situation. They watched the homeless man apathetically and engaged in small talk with each other before getting to work. For a moment, the film captured the mundanity of everyday absurdity that every cop experiences on a long enough timeline, and coupled it with the occupational numbness that eventually affects any profession. Suddenly, the fantasy aspect of the film felt secondary. I was free to enjoy the movie. The entire cast pulls its weight, though some actors offer more than others. Will Smith plays Will Smith as a cop, but somehow I found him less annoying than I typically do. He seems more vulnerable here, and I think this is the most beat up he's looked in a film. Joel Edgerton steals the show, striking a great balance between rookie cop and foreigner trying to fit in with the dominant population. His character's story is every immigrant story, and he conveys it will do. Noomi Rapace is wasted here as a determined and vicious villain with few lines, but she never ceases to impress with her commitment to even this small role. There's a lot to like about A Bright. Not only does it have a strong overarching plot about protecting a target to help stop a great evil, but it also has an equally compelling subplot that surrounds racism and corruption behind powerful institutional forces. The economy employed by the filmmakers is also fascinating. The opening credits are spent looking at graffiti, which detail current race relations without needing expositional dialogue, flashbacks, or some other contrivance to orient viewers. Most importantly, A Bright succeeds with its core concept. The fantasy world truly felt integrated into modern society. Would I have felt fully satisfied seeing in a theater? Probably not. So in that sense, the executive above was right. A Brighter wasn't strong enough for a theatrical release. On the other hand, I've seen worse films in the theater too. Make of that what you will. Ultimately, A Brighter feels prototypical in the way that it mashes up to genre. There's nothing offensive about it in a storytelling manner, which is why the negative campaigning against it seemed weird. I Imagine that there were political machinations behind the scenes as studios maneuvered to somehow slow down Netflix's momentum. However, I recently discovered that brighter Max Lantis is being accused of sexual assault. In the current climate of Hollywood, an accusation is as good as a conviction. Perhaps the attacks in Albright are a way to attack Lantis via his career. No. It turns out not at all. A Bright, Netflix's most expensive film to date. $90 million, directed by David Raw and starring Will Smith, and Joel Edgerton, redefines the genre by owning it, expanding it, and making it ever so much more complex. The results are beautiful. Maybe it won't win awards for cinematography, though in terms of design and shot selection, it's competent in the way a favorite tailor is. You're not getting anything too splashy, but you're getting dependable results. It's beautiful because by taking a format that both Ayer and Smith are quite familiar with, covering that in every regard you'd expect, and then going so far beyond it with tropes unique to the other genres, they create something new and improved, and they succeed wildly. Rada is a reimagining of the world we know, allowed a man in the High Castle. Only instead of allowing a shift in actual historical outcomes, that is the Axis powers winning World War II. It posits that certain fantasy elements exist in the world and have always existed in the world. There are humans, elves, orcs, fairies, centaurs, and more. It doesn't need to be explained because the movie very quickly teaches that this has always been the way of the world. Oh, and 2,000 years ago, there was a Dark Lord who was defeated, but not before orcs chose to fight on his side. Now fast forward to modern Los Angeles, and orcs are despised still for their long ago a snafu of choosing to fight for an evil overlord and the enslavement of all others. Understandable. Perhaps though historically people move beyond most transgressions faster than that. Abel Smith is one half of our cop buddies. Ward, the human other part, he was born to play baby. Early on the two are very clearly not buddies in the least. As is the case with all good buddy cop situations. It's only through grudging reluctance, if not outright hate, that any two good cops can become buddies. Joel Edgerton plays Jacoby the Orc in what is clearly the most emotionally resonant to work performance in film history. The bar was not set high as a Warcraft. The film dances through the tensions and conflicts born through racial strife. Though in this case, human is human regardless of skin color, while orcs and elves fill roles reserved for other stereotypes like gangsters and the rich Illuminati of the world. Ward doesn't like Jacoby, not only because he's an orc and he's his partner, but because Ward was shot by another orc with a shotgun and Jacoby didn't catch him. Everyone suspects Jacoby let him go because orcs follow clan law above everything else. However, Jacoby is also the first war cop in the nation. So there are all sorts of political considerations that characters cannot stop alluding to. It's a sensitive situation we're led to know. The film starts as a slow build, establishing backstory through character dialogue at times heavy on teaching the audience rather than being natural discourse between people. The slow build is supported by wonderful rapport between Smith Edgerton and Smith everyone else. It's pure Will Smith here, being his usual funny, better-than-you self-righteous self. However, unlike in another Smith-era pairing, A Suicide Squad, Smith isn't great in the midst of a film that makes no sense. He is at home in a bright A, and the jokes hit on the money nearly every time. In fact, despite Will Smith looking the part of a 5 years away from retirement cop, this felt more like vintage Will Smith than anything that's been on screen in a long time. Sure, it's a more worn-down version lacking that vibrant exuberance palpable, the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, but it's him. He may be older, but he's back, and it felt great to see him having fun again. So, it's a fantasy buddy cop drama. Big deal. Yes, it is. Successfully melding the two was probably nowhere near as easy as the film makes it seem. Maybe it's the right time for this movie. With popularity for surrealist programming like a Game of Thrones as a walking data at all-time highs, audiences are ready for a reimagining in this vein. But making it work with a story that supports it and visual effects to back it up took a team effort to create and probably a bit of luck too. Whomever pulled together the gay different production elements behind this film deserves a lot of credit as good decisions were made, especially the stunt choreography, action sequence, direction, and visual effects throughout. The film could have fallen flat if our buddy cops were hilarious, but none of this excelled. Fortunately, it did. Some of the action choreography was so refreshingly original as to leave you scratching your head, wondering why no one else has ever thought to do it before. Of course, it happens here and there when someone goes beyond what's average. The raid and audiences lap it up. In fact, adding an elf element to the fight scenes allow the use of parkour and martial arts stunts that wouldn't make sense in a buddy cop movie unless you're dragged in jet leap. Lethal Weapon 4, or David Bell and Cyril Raffaelli District B13 to make it work. It was great, and the ruthlessness that felt natural to evil elves made the film feel real in unexpected ways. The byproduct of expanding the fabric of the racial universe is that the film deals with real-world issues under the pretense of fantasy. In this, it's only mildly successful. A Brighton never takes a hard stance on right and wrong in terms of racial issues or morality. Although stereotypes are overtly present and only partially broken down, there are times when characters attempt to change perception by explaining actions that are misconstrued through the lens of racial discrimination, but by film's conclusion are in no way addressed. That's fair. It's a large issue, and certainly too large for one movie to address in a way that would teach all peoples everywhere to move past perceived differences and embrace what makes us all the same. Note that we've yet to address the elephant in the room. The 500-time Dolly finds straight autophia Lord of the Rings magic. Yes, fantasy movies feature magic, and so too do Bright. In fact, it's a magic wand that drives most of the film's action. Basically, everyone wants it. Yet, our heroes are going to do everything they can to keep it from the hands of all bad guys, elves, orcs, gangsters, or corrupt cops. Because the wand is like a nuclear weapon that grants wishes despite being the item that drives narrative, action, and events. Magic plays a minor role in the film. It's there. It's teased at being great, and yet it's mostly out of sight, out of mind. They tease at it, hint at it, but it's tell and no show. This feels like an intentional holding back to allow for further world building and stories to be told. Expect sequels, and if Netflix follows its own formula, expect to hear about them sometime in the next couple of weeks, as this film will surely succeed and find massive metrics and analytics success through viewership and social media buzz. Certain revelations are offented and clearly coming, while others were more craftily delivered. I wasn't the only one in the audience groaning when he opted to revisit a moment from a training dia which he wrote, in which Ethan Hawke's character is saved from a gangster because he was revealed to have saved the gangster's daughter from being raped. It's the same play from the same playbook here. Only this time, the gangster keeps it real, and it felt like a callback with a slight slap to the face for the audience, believing Ayer would be so unoriginal as to steal his own thunder carte blanche by ice. A joy. Ride that embraces tension while distributing treats via laughs. It's real well fantastic, and it travels in it. There's little to complain about and much more to anticipate. A.A. Brighta felt like an opening act to a much larger story. Can we have a fantasy series that plays out through films rather than episodes? I certainly hope so. Definitely stream this one over the holidays while friends and family are near. Bright is the best Netflix original movie to date, and it absolutely deserves to be seen on the big screen. Though don't let that stop you from watching at home, as end-of-watch director or a David's welcome return to the cop movie genre. A.A. following a disastrous wrong turn into Suicide Squad. Territory of which we will say no more. A.A. fills an intense grown-up movie niche that Hollywood once did so well, but has since replaced with formula-driven product. That's not to suggest that Bright doesn't stick to the script. This is a Will Smith a starring vehicle after all. The most satisfying of its kind since his Bad Boy days. Though writer Max Landis is something of a pop culture savant, capable of synthesizing everything from pulp fiction fantasy to Shane Black action comedies into a kind of wild and witty blockbuster super weapon. His writing is familiar in the way that Tarantino movies are familiar. cleverly remixing familiar buddy cop tropes with its alien nation premise and fresh in the way that Tarantino movies are fresh, inventing original set pieces and new twists on old character types, which no doubt explains why Netflix paid so much, reportedly $3.5 million for this screenplay, set in a parallel universe version of Los Angeles, where humans live in harmony with orcs, elves, and fairies. Well, maybe harmony isn't quite the right word, more like an uneasy balance. At this ambitious yet astonishingly well-executed Netflix tentpole directly benefits from the way he airs critics' streetwise sensibility grounds Lantis gift for creating an elaborate comic book mythology. Bright hinges on the relationships between two reluctantly paired police officers, battle-scarred beat cop Daryl Ward, Will Smith, and his idealistic new partner Nick Jacoby, Joel Edgerton, the first ever allowed on the force. It's a brilliant twist on a no dynamic that simultaneously supports an allegory about 21st century discrimination so rich you could create a college course dedicated solely to analyzing how it operates. Plenty of sci-fi movies it off. In fact, not since District 9 has a movie taken the underlying tensions of a community. In this case, Rodney King-styled police brutality and unchecked ramp part in fighting and so creatively amplified them to suit an otherwise straightforward action plot. In an opening credits montage that walks the tight trope between hokey and dog, Bright begins with shots of street corner murals, graffiti tags, and other signage that establishes the pecking order between races. At the bottom are the orcs, who dress like inner-city thugs, costumed in sports jerseys and gang colors up to their Shrek-like heads, which feature unique pigmentation. Each one is unique, suggestive of elaborate facial tattoos and hours spent in the makeup chair. Then come the humans, almost none of whom are white, though they tease one another about their ethnic differences. They seem to live in a kind of post-racial, post-gender, segregated equilibrium. And above that hover the elves, an elite class who hoard the wealth from a private district where they spend their days running the world. And shopping. It's a complicated social system to establish, and yet Wright does, so without relying on traditional exposition, letting interactions between characters a themata. Whether it's orders delivered by a Korean-American commanding officer played by Margaret Cho, or the chill that arises when Jacoby takes a detour through Elftown. Revealed how this hierarchy operates. Certain real-world racial biases still apply, and Ayer could catch some flack for presenting Latino gang members as scary pack animals. Though it should be said that every is intimidating in this world. In fact, Bright transposes fantasy elements commonly found in kids' entertainment to the world of heavy-duty adult action. For instance, its fairies are nothing like Tinkerbell, but foul-mouthed pests with razor-sharp teeth. In the tradition of Dennis Hopper's Colors, Ayer has delivered another bloody street-level cop movie in which even the most beloved characters can be shot. And the law is just a loose suggestion that folks on either side freely ignore. It's a formula he established in harsh times and has been incrementally improving ever since. And while we charitably assume that his studio-overhauled superhero foray doesn't represent his true voice or abilities, it clearly gave him the confidence to tackle something as expansive as this, and a stylistic toolkit with which to push certain film noir elements farther, resulting in an ink-black world broken up by smoke and neon. Meanwhile, Lantis' imagination seldom reduces to fit the four indie-level productions he's written so far, including his monster movie inversion Victor Frankenstein, an inspired conceit that comes apart at the seams in the climactic stretch. But here, Netflix has ponied up a budget hefty enough to support the project's significant visual and practical effects requirements. Paired it with a MacGuffin that springs naturally from this fictional world. Everybody is scrambling for possession of a magic wand that, should it fall into the hands of something called the Bride, has the power to raise the Dark Lord and reopen a battle for the fate of the Earth. And Landis has improved significantly on the clunky capture-the-flag conceits at the heart of most Marvel and Transformers movies. None of this would have worked without the chemistry between Smith and Edgerton. Early on, Smith seems to be trying too hard, wrestling with some torture dinner conflict during domestic scenes with his wife and daughter, who disappear for the rest of the film, while Edgerton has the not insignificant challenge of acting through heavy prosthetics. But once we get the chance to observe them together, the dynamic works in intuitive ways. Smith's Ward is the cut-up and cowboy confident hero, while Jacoby is too literal to make jokes and relatively slow to engage in conflict situations, especially those that would involve actually shooting someone. Much of the plot involves running from one explosive standoff to another, while attempting to protect T. Lucy Fry, whose ethereal looks and gibberish dielectric, all Milovich's character in The Fifth Element from a ruthless self named Leela Nuumera, base all while evading corrupt cops, a man in black-style magic task, force led by Edgar Ramirez, intimidating orc gangs, and a wheelchair-bound Cole who calls himself Poison Mono. These confrontations are not for the faint-hearted, as Ayer mixes heavy weaponry with the occasional magic trick, showing a ruthless disregard for basic rights, be they human, orc, or otherwise. Fairy lives don't matter today. Smith cracks in an early creature exterminating scene, but the sentiment could just as easily apply to all races. Bright may seem cavalier about all that killing, but it sends a message without hammering it home at every turn. And at a relatively tight, by Netflix standards, 107-minute running time, it doesn't overstay its welcome, but leaves you wanting more. If someone told you they were going to watch a bunch of humans, orcs, and elves fight over a mystical wand for 2 hours, Brighter drops you straight into downtown Los Angeles in a world where orcs are debaucherous thugs, elves are refined and highly fashionable creatures, and humans are somewhere in between. Put simply, it's more like Vertigo's of Fables meets End of Watcher than anything set in Middle-earth. LAPD officer Daryl Ward, Will Smith is partnered with the world's first orc deputy, Nick Jacoby, Joel Edgerton, and the tension between the orc and human community is running high after Ward gets shot while Jacoby is crossing the Munich street to get him an ice cream. Things become very sour between the two partners, and the prejudice against orcs by humans and elves is brought to the forefront. Sound familiar? That's because Ebright manages to capture the failings of the real world and translates them into a digestible and sometimes hilarious package. It features all the hallmarks of a film that will offer a biting critique on the social injustices of society, police brutality, racialized power structures, and the pioneers who try to tear them down. But once it immerses you in its unique environment, it doesn't know what to do next. The plot centers on the two officers stumbling upon a magic wand that only a few special elves called Brights can handle. Non-brats will literally burst if they attempt to pick it up. But that doesn't stop an onslaught of groups, including a Mexican cartel, a murderous elvish cult led by Leela, Noomi Rapace, and a North Ganga tearing apart the city to get it back off them. What isn't clear is why Ward and Jacoby decide to take on this huge task with no apparent plan other than to simply escape and survive. It isn't until the final quarter of the movie they decide to come up with an idea, and even then, it's bound to force an eye roll. The problem is that the flick falls into the same trap as some of director David's worst works, fusing messy plots with pointless bloodshed. This combination with Max Landis' screenwriting American Ultra only adds bloated dialogue and characters we feel nothing for, nonetheless. I couldn't help but think that this would provide the perfect setting for a fantasy cop series instead. The world's racial interactions are interesting, and the characters are somewhat likable. If this was just one dud episode in an entire season, I wouldn't let it tarnish my judgment. There are also references to characters who make brief appearances or don't appear at all, making the movie particularly arduous to follow. The mention of a Dark Lord early on felt like foreshadowing for a big showdown later, but the character never appeared by the credits. Despite agonizingly carrying on, a brighter still felt unfinished. The actors do their best to deliver drawn-out dialogue, but what's ultimately missing is any real point to the film. The sharp humor sometimes cloaks this devastating reality, but even Smith's punchy attitude isn't enough to save the yawn fest that ensues at some points. Abrita is being released right before the Christmas break, which means a lot of eyeballs will be frantically searching Netflix's library for something to occupy them. Unless you're interested in a film that pivots between intense action scenes and incredibly dull dialogue, you'd be better off spending your 2 hours watching some of the television series that Netflix is best. Stumbling into the department of what were they thinking? A broken bar. At first glance, this dual Smith-David fantasy feature draws far too much familiarity from another ill-conceived 1988 feature film, Alien Nation. But this time, the aliens are replaced with orcs, elves, and fairies, thrust into a future that resembles today's more downtrodden downtown LA, adding a high-tech Novo Elf City green screen. But now for those not familiar with the 1988 film that spawned an ill-fated season of a Washoe that deservedly went nowhere, Alien National is about aliens landing on Earth and migrating into society, eventually having a cop duo human and alien work against a drug ring that's pushing a dangerous narcotic that only affects the aliens. The history behind this 1988 film is an interesting one that included producer Guyon Hurd, the Terminator aliens receiving a script that was apparently at a few studios that were on the verge of purchasing it. It was known as a page-turner. What few people are unaware of is that the original script was by a little-known writer by the name of James Cameron, who had just been a sheet of the Terminator. But I happened to have a connection at 20th Century Fox at the time, and the script was slipped to me. I was blown away by the story. It was one of those scripts where you could not see how the studio could go wrong with it. Yet they did, whether it be the director or the case of too many studio execs spoiling the broth. The final product of Alien National was a big ho-hum. Max Landis, Victor Frankenstein, American Ultra, and David Hare, Suicide Squad, End of Watch, have not made their film any better, even with former box office champ Will Smith. The huge difference, besides a whole fairy tale angle, is that Alien National at least established how everything came to be. Willie Breida just throws it out there as if we somehow missed the prequel. That's right, it plays like the second installment of a mediocre trilogy. The whole fairy tale angle never goes beyond a few CGI and makeup effects. Orcs are more or less unruly gangbangers, and elves just happen to be the corrupted rich that have infected the feds instead of drugs. Everyone is after a magic wand that can summon the Dark Lord and alter the world as we know it. But is this world really worth saving? It's so dirty with little redeeming value. The only saving grace is Joel Edgerton's wide-eyed dork officer who provides some comedy relief. Action sequences never go beyond the lobby movie action fare, which could be fun if it was not saddled with such a downbeat tone masquerading as serious drama. There's so much nonsense throughout, one cannot help but wonder if it was trying to pass as humor. One scene in particular in the beginning has Will Smith's character talking about how he will not mess with fairies, but a little nagging from his wife has him swatting at one. The whole sequence feels like a throwaway, like much of Smith's performance that feels like a fond continuation from his Suicide Squad, a movie. All the explosions, car chases, and barrage of bullets cannot muster much excitement, because when it comes right down to it, a Breida is dull. Sadly, a concept that was underutilized in the late 80s is now a total misfire in 2017. We can only hope Landis, Ayer, and Smith eventually involve themselves in a better film and not even think of attempting a misguided sequel for a quick cash and grab. Perhaps we should leave the orcs, elves, and fairies to Peter Jackson. Brighton marks the first blockbuster-sized effort produced by Netflix. Rather than acquiring the film through their usual bidding process, Netflix made the film for $90 million and released it exclusively on their streaming platform, except for a single theater in New York and another in Los Angeles. Not only is this tentpole-sized effort the most expensive Netflix original to date, it also boasts an impressive cast and all the frills of a Hollywood production. Behind the camera, director David re-teams with his Suicide Squad. 2016 leading man Will Smith for a genre mashup scripted by pop culture guru Max Landis Chronicle. A Victor Frankenstein synthesizing fantasy elements inside a gritty buddy cop scenario. Alta would undoubtedly play better on the immersive big screen. The limitations of a small screen presentation cannot be blamed for its overused tropes, familiar structure, and altogether lousy writing. And to be sure, the film can only be described by comparing it to other better material, a Telsk mythology, and gamely married to airstring of LA cop movies. In the film's alternative modern-day version of LA, orcs and elves have lived among humans for centuries, separated only by their classes. At the top, elves, with their shimmering hair and pale eyes, are an elitist class that divides their time between running the world and shopping. Humans sit comfortably in the middle, whereas orcs, who have your blue skin marked by an apparent melanin disorder, occupy an inferior social class, associated with low IQs, lumbering physicality, criminal behavior, and heavy meal music or prophecies which foretell of a dark lord who will return, appear in the graffiti spray gang lands of LA, implying a complicated backstory, some of which is detailed in the film's 2-hour runtime. Surely Netflix is planning sequels, but actual magic proves rare in this blended world of fantasy and reality. In fact, federal agents Edgar Ramirez, Happy Anderson, seek out magic-enabled individuals known as Brights, for fear that they obtain a rare magic wand and could cause no end of destruction. Viewers familiar with the Alien National 1988 will recognize the basic setup, which itself was a genre-inflected take on the racially clashing buddy cops from a 48-horse in 1982, and a lethal weapon in 1987 weary street cop Dara Ward Will Smith has a new partner, Nick Jacoby, Joel Edgerton, the first orc ever to become a police officer. Ward, heritage or his badge, even though Jacoby is an outsider among his own kind, not to mention idealistic and honest to a fault, the otherwise exclusively human LAPD doesn't trust in how, would prefer to have him ejected from the force. Ward's superiors want him to find any plausible reason to have Jacob be fired, but the threat of bad publicity looms. An obvious parallel to race relations and civil rights issues pervades the material, although it's not treated as a serious commentary. In one sequence, Ward lectures his daughter against prejudicial remarks, but the very next moment he announces fairy lives don't matter when he smashes one of the winged zippy pests to death. The plot kicks into gear when Ward and Jacoby discover a frightened elf, Tekka, Lucy Fry, with a dreaded magic wand, which is basically a nuclear weapon that grants wishes. An elvish group called Inferni, headed by Leela New base hopes to resurrect the Dark Lord and needs the one to do so. Elsewhere, several assorted factions, including dirty LAPD cops, Latino gangsters, and Nor crew, and the aforementioned feds of want for their own reasons. Ward and Jacoby spend much of the film out in a series of bloody shootouts chased through LA strip clubs and heavy metal venues. Dragging along the virtually silent non-entity take a while dodging one group only to find themselves in the clutches of another. Our mismatched heroes learn to trust each other along the way. Not that the audience will care. Smith's character is disagreeable and unpleasant, while the dull Jacoby character never allows Edgerton's performance to penetrate the orc makeup. Brita is less interested in telling a story than world-building to establish a franchise. Oh, when Lantis characters aren't yelling shut up at one another, Tori constantly expounding the film's detailed mythology. Even though everyone in the film lives in this world and should, much of the film explaining everything for the audience's sack. Do a Bright Night never really stops inventing new wrinkles and magic rules, much to the exasperation of the viewer. The exposition continues in the background as well, hoping to evoke a sense of wonder with the random appearance of a dragon flying in the night sky. But the brightest tricks remain obvious. For instance, humans will explode if they attempt to hold a magic wand, except for an ultra-rare human bright. Guess who that might be? And doom-laden references to the not help but recall Voldemort and failed to pique our interest in a training dia, 2001, a Street King So 2008, a End of Watcha 2012, and another. Half-ozen other films about corrupt LA cops, Ayer's frantic macho energy has proved more stimulating. His brand of cinema works on a visceral level, propelling his characters into a danger zone of gangs, guns, and street crime. Combining his usual material with fantasy elements doesn't add much to the template, aside from some ambitious CGI action sequences and mythology, where the Fad Dungeons Dragons do a Brida is certainly an attractive prospect, given the talent involved. But T's aggressive and ultra-masculine perspective feels tired and perhaps outdated for Smith. And some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.